Science, dreams, and the periodic table of elements. How God used the dream of an atheist to demonstrate science in the Bible. That is our topic for today. And I know you're probably scratching your head. I could just about read your minds saying, Stan, how are you going to do this? Make some sort of connection between the periodic table of elements and the Bible and show some science connection. And then what are dreams? How does that come into play? Well, if you stay tuned, don't touch that dial. I promise you that I'll make the connection clear. All right. So first, though, I want to give special recognition to the person who shared this with me first, my teacher in this subject, Laverna Patterson. About 8 to 10 years ago, I came across a website where she was sharing this information. Absolutely fascinating. Blew my mind. I reached out to her. She answered all my questions. And I was just absolutely a captivated audience with what she would go on to share with me, with this and with other material. And so I just want to give special recognition to Laverna Patterson. So now let me go ahead and take you back to high school. It was probably high school for most of you. It was for me. It was my junior year when I got the introduction to this, the periodic table of elements, chemistry's periodic table of elements to be exact. You remember this? I know this wasn't a favorite class for probably many of you. It wasn't even for me. I eventually grew to appreciate and even like chemistry after that. But this was that dreaded class. But this was the highlight for that particular course, that subject, that science. And so now that you know what the science is, what table we're going to refer to, I know you're asking, well, who's the atheist then? So who is that non-believer? His name is Dmitri Mendeleev. He was a 19th century scientist. More specifically, he was a Russian chemist and a professor, and he taught at St. Petersburg Technological Institute and the University of St. Petersburg. So what is it about Dmitri Mendeleev that makes him important to this presentation? Well, Dmitri Mendeleev was obsessed with finding a logical way to organize the chemical elements that we find on the periodic table of elements. See, you must understand that before this, there was no organization to it. There was no table as we see it in its orderly fashion. But scientists did know that there had to be some way of arranging them. There had to be some scientific way of ordering these elements, but no one had figured it out. And Dmitri Mendeleev was absolutely not just fascinated, but he is characterized as obsessed with it. See, Dmitri Mendeleev is the person who eventually became credited with creating chemistry's periodic table of elements. It is his work, or it is a result of his findings, shall I say, that we have the table today. And so he's been given credit for that. You will find it rather interesting to know that it wasn't by mathematical formula. It wasn't by scientific experimentation that Dmitri Mendeleev came up with this table. I think you're probably figuring it out already. It was through a dream. Imagine that. In a book written by Paul Strather entitled Mendeleev's Dream, this is what Dmitri Mendeleev says. In a dream, I saw a table where all the elements fell into place as required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. Okay, let me just let that sink in for a moment. Okay, are you hearing this? Are you seeing the implication? So this scientific, this chemistry scientist, professor of 2 universities, trying to figure out how to arrange the elements, and he eventually didn't do it by experimentation or calculation from a formula, but he got it from a dream. Are you kidding me? How does science have its roots in a dream? The science of the table of elements, that is. Absolutely fascinating. And I could just imagine that in this dream, he's seeing this animation where the elements are flying and moving about, and they all come down and settle into a certain order. And this order, as he said himself, he wrote it down. He eventually shared it with his colleagues. They all looked at it. They all agreed. The science community, they said, yes, this is it. You figured it out. This is it. It makes sense. Wow. Wow. Imagine that this very hardcore science, chemistry, and all of its complexities has its roots in a dream. So you're asking yourself now, well, Stan, how does this table here that we see, why would God use an atheist? Why would he use a non-believer? Can you share some insights with me on that? Well, this is a good question. I would say that it's perhaps because God foresaw that 150 or about 150 years later, after the fact, that we would live in a world that was largely secular and was full of people of a show-me generation. People who are not satisfied with just you telling them that this is true and that is true and this person told me this, but rather show me the science, show me some evidence. Can you be objective in your explanation? And because of this, God used not a believer, but he used a non-believer. Imagine that. It's not that a believer can't say things that are truthful, scientific. Of course not. We've got a plethora of scientists who all believe in God and the one and true God, the creator of the universe. But imagine this information, this connection coming from someone who doesn't believe. God using an atheist. I believe that that's why he inspired Dmitri Mendeleev with this dream. But again, you ask, Stan, what does this have to do with, what's the correlation? I mean, where does the Bible come into play? Well, it comes from the days of creation. Remember that? The first day God created what? Light. The second day he created air, water, separated the waters from the water, put the sky in the middle, the firmament, that is. Third day, he created the earth, made the fruit, the trees. The fourth day, the sun, the moon, the stars. The fifth, the birds, the fish. The sixth day, animals, man. And then the seventh day, he created the Sabbath, the day of rest. So, once again, Stan, what does this have to do with the periodic table? Can you bring it all together? All right, let's look at it. And I've got about 9 minutes to do it. The periodic table of elements can be divided into, as we examine these, see the vertical columns, the arrangement or the grouping of elements as we look at them vertically, we call those families or groups. If we look at them horizontally, they're divided into 7 rows. Those rows are called periods. And as it turns out, everything that you find on a period are all the elements that you would find on its corresponding day of creation. So, for example, on period 1, you find 2 elements, hydrogen and helium. On the first day of creation, those are the two elements that you would find. Hydrogen and helium. Okay, Stan, support what you're saying. Support what you're saying. So we have this scientific phenomenon. It's called nuclear fusion. And in nuclear fusion, what happens is you've got hydrogen atoms that are moving all about. If they collide with one another, or when they collide with one another, as long as all the conditions are right, they have the right speed, hit the right angle, if you will. And we can't actually see the angle or know the speed. Just indulge me. When they collide with one another, they form a new atom. That atom is helium. And now, after they form, energy is given off as a byproduct. Take a wild guess as to what form this energy comes in. It comes in the form of light. So on the first day, we've got hydrogen and we've got helium. Those are the two elements that, if you were to take inventory of all the elements that existed, they are all that were needed for the first day. Got two hydrogens, they form a helium when combined through nuclear fusion. And for those of you who just want to see the scientific formula, denotation, we've got two hydrogens here showing its atomic number, its mass combined. You've got helium, mass is maintained. There's no loss in mass. They form. Everything is maintained. It's consistent. And then what's giving off in that byproduct that we talked about is energy, and it comes in the form of light. Absolutely fascinating. And then as we move down the table, look at this. As we move down the rows, move down the periods. If we go to the second period, we've got lithium on the far left. Beryllium is next. And then on the far right, we've got neon. All of those elements, plus the elements that came the day before, are all that were needed for what God created on the second day. You look at the third period. Everything that you find on the third period are all that was necessary for God to create what he did on the third day. Plus, of course, any of the elements that you would find on the second and the third day, or the second period and the first period. And you keep going all the way down, and there's something special about the seventh period. We're going to come back to that. But I just wanted to show this. There's another correlation, actually, that is interesting. The first 3 days are described as containers, and this is the way Laverna Patterson shared it with me. Then the next 3 days, the fourth day, the fifth, and the sixth, we'll label those as fillers. So there's this interesting interaction, correlation, association between the first and the fourth, the second and the fifth, the third and the sixth. On the first day, light was created. Well, on the fourth day, the sun, moon, and the stars were created. And what do we know about them? They're covered with light. They provide light. The second day, air and water. Well, on the fifth day, we've got fish and birds. And just as I've shown here with the vast colors, or the brilliant colors found in the rainbow, with the lettering here, you find that fish and birds have more brilliant, bright colors that you would find in the rainbow that we see both in the air and in the water. And then the animals created on the sixth day and humans made from clay, they seem to reflect the colors that we find in the clay and the rock and the trees that were created on the third day. So there's this additional correspondence, correlation, if you will, between the days of creation, the first three and the second three. But let's get to that, the makeup of what we find in the elements that were created on each of the days. Okay, so we know, as we mentioned, if you look at line 1, we have helium and hydrogen. Those are the two atoms. that you would find on the first day, and that makes sense through the process of, or it adds up through the process of nuclear fusion. But let's look at period 2, or day 2 of creation, where space and air and water were created. Well, look at all the elements. Look at the makeup of air, water. What do we find in air? We find oxygen, we find ozone, we find carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, we find methane, which is CH4, we've got hydrogen, we've got nitrogen, and of course water is H2O. If you look at each of these elements, you will find them either on period 2 or on period 1. You look at period 3 and you have, which was the day that matter or the dry land appeared in trees. Well, guess what? If you were to examine the elements that can be found in clay, in trees, those elements can be found on period 3 or period 2 and period 1, like silicon dioxide, SiO2. I'm sorry, that's aluminum silicate, I believe, or SO4 or magnesium. These are the molecules that make up some of the elements that were created on the third day. And you go down the list and the same is true. In fact, let's take a look at this one here. I've got 1 minute to finish this up. Air, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. I said those. Quartz, which is that silicon dioxide. That's what quartz is made from. And you find all those elements on period 3, 2, or 1. Let's go down the list. We've got the sun, moon, and the stars. Moon, which the moon, which is considered primitive rock, we find, but there is no granite, found there. We find calcium, aluminum, silicon, iron, magnesium. These elements can be found on period 4, 3, 2, or 1. Absolutely amazing. And you keep going down the list, and and then we arrive at the 7th day. The 7th day Sabbath, the day of rest. You know where there's something interesting about the elements that you find in the 7th period. These are the radioactive elements. And if there's anything that we know about radioactive elements, is that they're looking for one thing. They're looking for rest. Wow. What an amazing correlation. The day of rest correlates to the atoms, the elements that are looking for rest. With this association, it just gives an absolute new meaning to the Sabbath being the day of rest. Now, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I also want to add that this discovery between Dmitri Mendeleev and the Bible that Laverna Patterson made was also given to her in a dream. Absolutely fascinating. That gives new meaning to what Acts 2:17 tells us, that I will pour out my spirit upon the people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Young men will see visions, and old men will dream dreams. So, to the question, science, dreams, and the periodic table of elements, this is how God used it. This is how he used the atheists to show the correlation between the periods on the periodic table of elements and the 7 days of creation. Bless the name of the Lord that he made provisions for everyone, people from every background and circumstance, to get what they needed, to know without a shadow of a doubt that he exists. All praises be unto him.